Good morning, guys. Welcome to the Recovery Channel podcast. My name is Dr. Rob Kelly, addiction doctor, along with Jennifer Lovely, coming to you this morning live on Facebook and YouTube. And if you listen to us on podcast tonight, welcome as well. Great day in San Antonio, a bit cold, but it's beautiful, sunny outside. How are you this morning, Jen?
Well, happy solstice. We've got the shortest day of the year today.
Oh my God, I should know that.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
I know. So, and then we've got the conjunction happening here this morning, or today, actually, in the world where Mars and Saturn and Jupiter, actually, all of the planets align. So there should be some nice, good stuff happening for us in the world.
Yeah, we have an app around here called Nextdoor, and everybody posts this stuff about things that are going to happen in the neighborhood. And everybody, 6:28 tonight. You've got to go outside and you've got to look up in the sky. So I'll be there 6:25. Well, I'll go in for that procedure today that I talked to you about again for the last time. So that's what condition I'm going to be in. Usually go to bed after that. So sore, very sore.
Oh.
Okay, guys, you know what time it is. It's time to introduce a guest. Dr. Nowinski is back on the show. We talked to him a couple of months ago, and the recording didn't go well, so we decided that we're going to do it all over again, fresh, and that was my fault. I do apologize to everybody, but it's going to be a great show, guys. Doing great stuff coming up, and stick around. We'll be right back after this with Joe Nowinski. Welcome back to the show, guys. Recovery Channel podcast live this morning on Facebook and on YouTube. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are listening. Record figures are already hitting the screen. We're with Joe Nowinski this morning. Good morning, Joe. How are we?
Good morning and happy solstice.
Yes, sir. Happy solstice. Yeah, I love that. Absolutely.
How are you this morning?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Fortunately, myself and my family are safe here. It's very, very scary times, to say the least. But, thank goodness we are safe. Going to have a very, very modest Christmas.
Yeah, I hear you. I feel you. So I know we talked a little bit last time about, recovery, 12 steps, but I kind of want to jump in really quick and what it is to be, how to continue to get help be after 90 days, 6 months, whatever it is, and what are the steps to keep us emotionally sober?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that.
Yeah, you're breaking, Jen, pretty badly. We got a third of that, unfortunately.
Let me pop out, Dr. Rob. You go ahead and take up, and I'll come back in. Okay,
so Dr. Joe, I remember last time we was talking about recovery, long-term recovery, and if somebody came to you today and said to you, like, I'm struggling with alcoholism and addiction, what would be the best advice that you would give them?
The best advice I'd give somebody now is I'd say, look, we now have, for the last 20 years, accumulated a lot of actual good research on what can help recovery, what can sustain sobriety. And based on that, I tell them, number one, you really should be going to a fellowship like AA. There are a couple others like Women for Sobriety, an abstinence-based fellowship. We know that, relying on a fellowship is associated with sobriety. If you go to AA, we also know that getting a sponsor soon, within, say, the first couple months, increases your chances of staying sober. We also know that there's a difference between just going to meetings and sitting there and going to meetings and becoming active, getting involved, developing some relationships, some friendships, reading materials. We know from research that makes a big difference as well. And the last thing I'd say is that we also know from research that sustaining that involvement in a fellowship over a period of time is really critical. That we know that people who average, say, between 50 and 60 meetings a year, which is not a lot, but it's an average between 50 and 60 meetings a year, and they do that consistently, they have a 70% chance of staying sober 5 years, over 5 years, which is very significant. So, and the last thing I'd advise them is probably, if you do feel that you have some underlying issues, depression, history of abuse or something like that, do get some additional counseling in addition to going to AA or fellowship.
Yeah, that's very important. I don't know about you, but I know when I'm working with people, not so much drugs, probably about 90%, but every time there's alcohol, not abuse, but actually alcoholically drinking, there's always trauma. When we take it back, there's always trauma. So we know that it's a predisposition, runs back in the family. You can trace it back. Do we know right now how it skips a generation? I mean, I know lots of families where, sister doesn't get it, but brother does, or vice versa. Do we know the science behind that yet?
I don't think we know the genetic science behind what makes it skip a generation. We do know that there's a genetic link. It's not predetermined. In other words, substance abuse, just like anxiety disorders or depression, tend to run in families. So that if you have someone who is a close relative who has had one of those disorders, you're more vulnerable to getting it yourself. But it's not 100%. So that's the good news, that it's not preordained that because you have some alcoholism in your family that you're going to become an alcoholic. Environmental factors and experience also play a very critical role.
Yeah, I've also found that's amazing, that the remapping of the brain and the trauma and where you live and how you brought up and how your mum and dad is and so on and so forth. I know that I believe I was born this way, so it was passed down to me, but it wasn't passed down to my brother and sister, which make them really, kind of hard to understand the disease. And they just couldn't understand what I was doing and why I was doing it and why I walked out on my kids and stuff like that. I still think today, Dr. Joe, I'd like your opinion on this. It's still such a dirty illness. It still very much lives in the closet, and nobody likes to admit, like, hey, I'm an alcoholic. I mean, plenty of people say it in meetings, but to really admit it, I mean, is that what you found as well? Like, it's almost a disgrace to be an alcoholic sometimes.
Sure. There's still a big stigma about two things in our society. One is about addiction, and the other is about mental illness. So a lot of families talk about either one. In my family, it was very common knowledge that there was a lot of alcoholism, but nobody really talked about it. In other families, it can be that, but it can also be depression, that people are ashamed of that. So there's a stigma for both mental illness and addiction. And I understand what you're saying, that it's very difficult for people who don't contract, say, an addiction, to understand why some people do. There is definitely a genetic link, however. So we know that if you have alcoholism or addiction in your family, you are more vulnerable. And you can't do anything about your genetic disposition. What people can do is they can do something about their environment, their experience. They may decide, because there's a lot of addiction in the family, that they are not going to drink, or they're only going to make sure they only drink moderately. They can make those kinds of decisions, but they still could have the vulnerability.
Yeah, I totally hear that. Can you hear me better, you guys?
Yep. Beautiful.
Okay, good. Thanks for that. So what do you suspect is the best remedy for people then to get rid of the stigma around addiction and mental health? With all of our knowledge now and where we are, we're now almost in 2021, we still have a lot of stigma. People still don't like to talk about it.
Yes, I do think it's getting better, though, Jennifer. I think that the fact that public figures, starting way back with Betty Ford, acknowledging her alcoholism, and other celebrities coming forward and acknowledging it, helps to reduce stigma. It's still there, but I think it's getting better. The same thing for mental illness, although again, it's getting a little bit better when people are able to so acknowledge that they suffered from depression, that it helps a little bit for people. Also, I think that if someone is able to, once they say go to a fellowship like AA, that can help reduce it, because they can experience acceptance. They can realize that there are a whole range of people who have this thing in common with them. And sometimes going for counseling can help. Talking to a therapist can help to reduce that stigma by understanding that you can't help your genetic, makeup, but you can do something about your addiction.
Yeah, I think a lot of people fall into that trap that you don't want to speak to anybody in case they out themselves. Can you imagine, Dr. Joe, how brave Betty Ford was when she came out with that? I mean, that could have gone really wrong really quick for her. And I'm so glad she did. I work with many celebrities today, and they're just like, Dr. Rob, no, this gets out, I will sue you. And it's just such a shame. And I try and talk them around, like, you know how much people on lives you'll say by just coming out, but very, very few people want to come out. And those that do always tell me, you can tell people in recovery, but never go to the press with it. It's just a shame. And I think if we need some sort of new plan, that's what we're trying to do, some new push into taking the stigma out. We call it a mental injury. We don't call it mental illness. It kind of lightens the load when the family listen to that you can actually recover from this stuff. And that's really important. Let me take you back to AA real quick, because I know you're a supporter of AA. Why do you think AA is so successful? And what's the percentage rate in AA now? Do we know?
Well, AA itself doesn't conduct research. That's why for many, many years, people were skeptical of it, especially people in like myself or researchers, because there was really no good evidence whether it worked or not. But in the last 20 years, there's been a lot of research. There's been a lot of research in it. And, I think that what seems to matter the most is the fact that there is the fellowship, there is the support of other people who are struggling to pursue the same goal, which is abstinence. Everyone recognizes that you just can't flip a switch and go from being an alcoholic to abstaining. Some people misconstrue AA as saying that, well, if you drink, you get kicked out. There's no such thing. I mean, everyone who's been in recovery recognizes the risk of a slip at any time. But being in a group for all on, as the research points out, that being involved in it for a long period of time seems to make a big difference. When people might go for therapy, for example, that's time limited. People go for therapy, go for 6, 8, 10 sessions. They may talk about their drinking. They may even get some useful advice from a therapist about how to say no to a drink and so on and so forth. But that ends. Once therapy is over, it's over. And then the person is sort of on their own. Whereas what we know from another quick research study out of Stanford followed people for 16 whole years. And so they asked them at the outset, what do you want to do? Do you want to go to AA and get treatment? Do you want to go to treatment without AA? Or you just want to go to AA? And what they found was the people who chose the treatment without AA did the worst over time. And so those people who stuck with AA had much better outcomes even after 16 years. And probably most importantly, they did find that at any point in the 16 years, if someone stopped going to AA, they were more likely to start drinking again. So, I mean, the proof is in that, so that, clearly the fellowship matters. It's also free.
Yeah, that's the attraction I like. Where else can you go for treatment for $2 or $1 or something and get free coffee?
But the thing is about AA is that, and I think any kind of group therapy, I think the thing that helps is that there's self-disclosure in that therapy. There's self-disclosure in that conversation. And I think as humans, we want to be able to relate to the other people, right? And so when you go to a therapist and she doesn't have a drinking problem, or she hasn't gone through or a family member hasn't had an issue, I think it makes it very difficult to relate. So can you talk a little bit about that, how you saw that in your practice as well?
Yeah, I think that's beginning to change, but I think unfortunately it is true that I've encountered many therapists who, because they themselves have not experienced a substance use issue or someone in their family, they don't tend to relate to it, and they may fall back on what was once a very popular view, which is that these people are alcoholics because they have some kind of character flaw, that's sort of like morally weak or something like that. But now we understand, as I said before, that not only addiction, but issues like depression and anxiety disorders clearly run in families. So there's definitely a genetic link, and that can help reduce that stigma that you were talking about.
Yeah.
Hey guys, Dr. Joe Nowinski, sorry guys, Joe Nowinski's on the show. I'm just looking at your website as well, josephnowinski.com, guys. It's scrolling at the bottom of the screen. We'll be right back after this commercial break. Hey guys, welcome back for podcast users only. That was Life Over Addiction. Talk about Lance Wright. He's a transformational life coach. Let me help you navigate your life back to one of purpose and meaning. He talks about the shame and guilt no longer have to hold you back. Let's start a brand new conversation. He says you can reach him on lifeoveraddiction.com or email him info@lifeoveraddiction.com. Or you can call him 310-890-2337. And that's Lance, good guy. Okay, Dr. Joe's on the show. So can you, from an early age, let's say 9, 10, 11, 12, you start drinking and then again through your teens, and all of a sudden it's a problem drink, and you just can't stop. Is there a point in your life without any sort of treatment or any sort of AA that you can just say no to that compulsion?
Well, there is some research on what they call kind of natural recovery. And it is true that there are stories of people who just stopped at one point. But in my experience, when I hear about that from a client that said, say their parent, their mother or father was an alcoholic for many years and then quit, usually there's kind of a medical reason that underlies that most of the time, that something happened and they quit because they had a heart attack, they got sick, they were diagnosed with compromised liver function, and so there are some people who do that, but they're relatively rare. And as I said, there's usually some kind of consequence that forces them to do that. Unfortunately, most people sort of slip along what I call the substance use spectrum, from either experimental use when they're young or low risk use in parties, and then it gradually increases where people start, as adults, they go to Friday afternoon happy hours and they start having, 4 or 5, and then they start drinking every night after dinner, and it sort of creeps up on them. Okay, they don't connect the dots between drinking and any of its consequences, and so it's usually a pretty slow progression for people until they get to the point where, again, some kind of consequence becomes obvious. They go to the doctor and the doctor says your blood tests don't look so good, or they get a DUI, or they get a bad performance evaluation at work, something, something that kind of makes them face the consequence. But to answer the question, yeah, there are some people who are able to do that, but they seem to be pretty rare.
Well, and I'm, it's kind of curious. I have a friend, a high school friend, her mom recently just was diagnosed with cirrhosis of the liver. And it's because of consequences of years and years and years of drinking. Right. And yet her daughter's homelessness and drug addiction was not enough for her to quit. And so I almost feel like inside of that, there has to be a meaning behind it. Inside of it, there has to be a deeper thing behind it. Do you find that as well? That people need?
It has to be very personal for most people. Now, some people would react differently than your friend did. So I've talked to people who their spouse or their child had to go into rehab, and that's made them rethink their own drinking or substance use. That certainly happens. But a lot of times there has to be something personal. Like I said, those people who quit sort of what you might call spontaneously, it's not necessarily really so spontaneous. It might be because of a diagnosis. And the doctor said, if you keep drinking, you're going to get pancreatitis.
So with no predisposition, no gene passed down, nothing hereditary, can you drink yourself into becoming an alcoholic, Dr. Joe? Can you drink yourself?
Yeah, I think the poison pill there is tolerance. In my family, there was a huge tolerance for alcohol and a lot of alcoholism. And I realized that in college that I had that tolerance too. So I think you can drink yourself, even if there's no real history in your family, or there's only a history of moderate drinking. If you have a tolerance, in other words, you can keep drinking more and more, and over time it takes more and more. That's the key to how people slide along that spectrum into alcoholism.
Yeah, it is. And then there's the ones that just are full blown immediately as soon as they have like an allergy to the alcohol or drug, really, you know?
Yeah,
So,
I had a friend once whose daughter was 17, and truly the first time she drank, she was an alcoholic. You know, it was amazing. And she was able to accept the fact that from the very first time she started to drink, she couldn't stop drinking.
wow.
That was me, I think, Jen.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I drank at the age of 9, and I went through the 3 stages of alcoholism: the occasional drinker, the heavy drinker, and then the alcoholic. And I suppose in the first 2, I could have stopped if I wanted to, but as soon as I crossed the line into alcoholism, there was no doubt that I couldn't stop. Now, I could stop for a month or so,
right.
And this is where it got me every time, because after a month, I'd go, hey, or even a day or 2, I'd go, hey, that wasn't too bad last night. I got home, there's no blood on the sheets, the wife's happy, the car's in the driveway, I'm not an alcoholic. And then given any sufficient period, like 2 or 3 days or a week, bang, I'd be back to the beginning all over again. And it was just everything I touched, Dr. Joe, turned to gold. I was running a huge business, you know, and stuff like that. I had 2 kids, family, Bentleys, big house, you know, I had everything I need, but I couldn't stop drinking. And in the end, everything went. And it was sat on the street.
It reminds me of a number of clients I've had who are really very intelligent people and who stopped drinking. But in the back of their mind, just in the back of their mind, they keep holding on to this belief that they really drink normally. They look around, they say, gee, you know, I've been sober for 2 months, but, you know, I'd like to be like my friends. I really want to be able to drink normally. And they eventually, you know, fool themselves into thinking that they can do it. It's a very common human frailty to think that you can do something that, you know, it takes, you know, how many times do you have to run into the wall before you realize that you can't do it?
Yeah.
Well, there is that. Let's talk a little bit about being recovered. What it is you recovered, you've done the program, you've done the 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever the program is. Mm-hmm. And now you have to step into recovery. Not only is that scary for a lot of people to go out back into the world, not being fully supported, what does one need to be fully supported to continue to?
Yeah, well, that brings up a really critical issue, Jennifer, which is that people sometimes confuse rehab or treatment with cure. Sometimes people like to think of treating alcoholism like treating pneumonia. You know, you take medicine and the pneumonia's gone and you're better again and you don't have to worry. There's still a lot of people who look at it that way. Oh, she went into rehab and so now she's better. I look at it in my new book called Recovery After Rehab. I look at rehab as a necessary point of departure for recovery. You know, it's an old naval term that refers to where a ship is before it sets out on a long journey. That's called a point of departure. And I see rehab and treatment as a point of departure. It's very important. It points people in the right direction, but it's not the destination. Okay, it's a direction, not the destination. And so I think what needs to happen is that they need to implement a lot of lifestyle changes. They need to stay involved in a fellowship. They need to change a lot of people, places, and things in their lives, routines. This is not easy work, but this is what it takes to sustain recovery. Because just becoming complacent and thinking, well, I've been through rehab, I'm okay now, I can go back to the sports bar with my friends and watch football and not drink. It's very faulty kind of thinking. So they need to change make a lot of lifestyle changes. I also see it as something that needs to be approached collaboratively between the newly recovering person and their loved ones. Traditionally, a lot of people think of it as the recovery of sobriety is just the responsibility of the substance abuser. And sometimes the family members get the message like, stay out of it. You know, you're just enablers, so stay out of it. It's a very pejorative term to be called an enabler, you know. And so I really believe that it's best for the newly sober person for the family members to become part of this process. Dialogue about, are you going to meetings? Okay. You know, what are the meetings like? Sometimes they can go to some open meetings themselves to know what it's like. Helping change routines. For example, one client, his habit was he had a little workshop in the basement with a little refrigerator, and he'd go downstairs every night and drink and work on his workshop. Okay, and that was a very, very difficult ritual for him to change. But he worked with his family, and so they got rid of the refrigerator. They moved the TV that he had. They moved it upstairs, and so his older son, said, "Look, I'd like to work with you in the workshop sometimes." So they really changed that whole ritual and routine for him, and he credited that with helping him resist the urge to drink.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I know that these days we won't take a patient on unless the family signs up as well. Period. I mean, we just won't take them. Many people will. I think they're just taking the money for the hell of it and telling the family to be quiet. It doesn't work. I mean, it just really doesn't work. So it's a family illness and it's a family recovery. But this is what people don't understand. All people in that house where the patient goes back to has to be speaking the same language as we're teaching the patient. Otherwise, it's going to go back to speaking the old language. He's going to put that refrigerator back in the basement and he's going to start drinking again, because I know for a fact from my own alcoholism and recovery, you can't do this on your own. They did an experiment a few years ago. It was a friend of mine from Oxford University where I used to go, and very interested in addiction as I was when I left university. And they got a bunch of mice and they stuck them in separate cages, and there were 20 mice in 20 separate cages. And there was water in one feeder and there was cocaine mixed with water in another feeder. And 9 out of 10 times the mice went up and took the cocaine every single time because it made them feel good, which is what we knew that was going to happen. But then they took the whole 20 mice and they stuck them in a bigger cage, and they found out that only 30% took the cocaine and the others 70% took the water. And the conclusion of that, or the thought pattern of that, was that when people are in a group, they have more chance of drinking the water. And I thought that was very interesting, which gives us the philosophy that the fellowship, Alcoholics Anonymous is the book, guys, in case you're listening and watching and getting confused. We have a fellowship of the book. But when people are gathered, more people are gathered, amazing things happen when you start sharing these things. And I know for a fact that for me, I have a higher power and I have a program that's very strict. I watch, where I go, who I listen to. Like you said before, Dr. Joe, there's a bunch of other things that I do, but it's also a part of my recovery. I need to go to these places to recover. So it's very interesting.
You sort of integrated recovery into your whole lifestyle.
Yes.
Which is the point of my book, too, that you really need to integrate recovery into your whole lifestyle. You just can't walk out the door of rehab sober and say, I'm done. You're a testament to that. That's the way it really has to be. And also, it's true that sort of going to a fellowship and associating with people who are pursuing the same goal is like being offered the water.
Yes.
It truly is. And the other thing is that in terms of the recovery for the families, they also need to have a place to go drink the water, right? And they also need to have a place to have a conversation, their own language that they speak, so that they're not putting all of their stuff onto the addict or the alcoholic. Because for me, I needed to have a place to go to begin having conversations with other people to save myself. Otherwise, I was going to love my children to death. And I think that's not something that we, in our community and in our world, we're really talking about. I know I pushed that pretty hard because for me, I was going to love my children to death. And after 16 rehabs, I could have just continued to love them to death. But with the language of recovery, but the other side of it, it made a huge difference in my life. So not only do you have to bring recovery into your life, but there are some tips that we can give some people. Do you have some suggestions to support them as they step into a new journey on their boat?
Yes, it reminds me of the story of your friend and her daughter, which is really exactly to the point here about recovery after rehab, which is that it really requires the whole family to sort of look inward at themselves and how can they become collaborators in recovery. It's not to blame. I don't like the whole enabling concept because it's a very pejorative term. People don't intentionally enable an addiction. They do it out of the best of intentions, often do damage control or something like that. And they unwittingly and unintentionally allow it to continue. I've had so many examples of that. So it is true that it requires the family to look inward. In that case, people to look at if it's their adolescent who ends up in rehab, they need to take a look at their own drinking, or maybe their own cannabis use, for example. And also maybe they need to take a look at their lifestyle. And are there things that can change? Sometimes one of the things that happens in families today is that it becomes fragmented. And all the rituals and routines that they used to follow, they once followed, just fall by the wayside. They never eat together. They never talk together. And so in this case, it may seem remote, but it's not remote because it has a lot to do with supporting, say, a teenager who comes out of treatment to restructure the family so that they spend some time talking to each other. They eat dinner together 2 or 3 times a week. So there's a little bit of a more connection built, and that can help support that teen's recovery.
Definitely, that's 100%. I know my dad threw me out one night when I was drinking. I'd broken marriage, lost a house, stayed at his house, and I couldn't stop drinking. And he phoned my old sponsor, I think in London. My old sponsor said, throw him out. And he did. He came upstairs at 10:30 at night. He took me downstairs. Mom couldn't come out. She was too distraught. And he threw me out and gave me £10. And that was it. But many years later, Dr. Joe, was interested is when I was sober, me and my mom was having a coffee and Dad was at the bar, his Friday night drink with his friends. And I said, remember that time Dad threw me out? And she said, oh, yes. I said, I don't really think I've ever forgiven him for that. And this is what she said, Dr. Joe. She said, in 50-something years of being married to your father, that's the only time I've ever seen him cry. And I thought, how much courage did it take for him to do that? But by him doing that, he saved my life. Guys, Dr. Joe Nowinski is on the show. We're going to go to commercial break. We'll be right back talking about Dr. Joe's book. You don't want to miss this one, guys. Hey guys, welcome back to the show. That was Living Recovery Interventions. Recovery begins today. Recovery begins together. Give the gift of recovery, guys. Travis is a good friend of ours, knows what he's talking about. I still love the way he talks about the Xanax seizure in a car crash at 120 miles an hour, and he still survived. If a loved one is in trouble, guys, call Travis, 801-573-4188, 801-573-4188, or even visit the website, livingrecoveryinterventions.com. Remember, guys, recovery begins today. Recovery begins together. Okay, so I was thinking while we're on our break there that, when somebody comes to us, and I know we talked about this briefly, but I want to re-emphasize because a lot of families listen, will they say, I'm suffering from alcoholism, but I'm also suffering depression, and I'm suffering by bipolar, and they go on with the other illnesses that they've got, and we smile and go, well, of course you are. Because the isolation with me brought on, I think, the depression, because I didn't want to mix with people. I was ashamed in case people found out, what I was doing behind the back. And I'm sure that everybody knew, but nobody wanted to say anything back in the 80s. So it's really weird. And I don't know, Dr. Joe, do you think there's ever a time when we're going to come out of the closet completely?
I hope so. I don't know, but your experience is something that's been repeated countless times. Friends don't want to tell friends that I think maybe you're drinking too much. I think it's the stigma, as you say. Let's face it, our society promotes an awful lot of drinking. I mean, it's all over the place that promotes drinking. And what's happened too is, interestingly, is that drinking among women and older people are the groups that are experiencing the most rapid increase in pretty heavy drinking. I mean, a few years ago, I never would see a commercial on TV, for example, of women drinking hard liquor, of women drinking bourbon, for example. Years ago, that would have been unheard of. And now it's not only do you see the beer commercials where people of both sexes are celebrating and drinking a lot of beers, but also now where women are drinking hard liquor. So it's promoted so much. But ironically, the other side of that coin is it's promoted so much, but people hesitate to tell a friend, do you think you might be drinking too much?
Yeah. No, that's true.
Yeah, well, and this is a disease that requires rigorous honesty, and in order to stay sober. Mm-hmm. And what I notice is that there still is that fear of the rigorous honesty, not only in the AA community, but also in families. And so really being recovered and stepping into that recovery is scary, because we're going to actually have to ask ourselves to be rigorously honest. So talk to me about what does that actually look like to be rigorously honest?
Yes, you're absolutely right on, Jennifer. And not only recovery requires rigorous honesty, which is what the 12 steps are all about. It requires humility, being willing to admit that we can't control everything.
Yeah.
It also requires rigorous honesty about how it's affected us and loss of control. But that exists not only, say, within families or within the individual, but even within AA. Right. I've been told that people will go to an AA meeting and be sitting there with an intense craving and not say something.
Right.
and then one guy told me that he went to a meeting and before it ended, somebody said, "Is anybody here sitting on a drink?" Mm-hmm. and he raised his hand, and he said it saved him that day. But left to his own devices, the stigma is still there. And he would go to the AA meeting and feel it was helpful. But again, it takes that rigorous honesty, being able to say, I've lost control of this. I need to reach out to others. It's one day at a time. I still may have cravings. And yet it's interesting when people break through that, when they break through that wall and to get to the other side, it's miraculous how it changes their lives. People that I know who have a lot of recovery, a lot of sobriety, are just the most, admirable people I know. They lead good lives, they lead good, honest lives. And they not only that, but they can accept it in others. Okay, right. They can accept the flaw in others.
Well, and they can accept the honesty. Like, even people have a hard time saying, gosh, my feelings are hurt, or gosh, this is my experience. Mm-hmm. Rather, people really struggle with just being honest in general. So I think that is, and for me, that was actually the point of where my life really shifted with my kids, is where I got to be really rigorously honest about my feelings. Mm-hmm. And it actually didn't have anything to do with them. And I think that's the difference. Like, my experience is not your experience. Mm-hmm. I get to have my feelings, and that's not your feelings, but we intermix all of our stuff. We enmesh it. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's actually the thing that keeps us from families really being able to heal, is because we intermesh each other's feelings. That's just my opinion, but
no, I think it's true. I think that the recovering alcoholic or addict needs to be rigorously honest with himself or herself, as well with family members and in AA. Needs to acknowledge that. But then family members need to be able to be rigorously honest too, and talk about, some things that they may regret, some things that they would like to change. Sometimes kids, for example, will feel responsible for their parents' addiction. They need to be able to be honest about that.
Yeah.
In order to heal. If they just keep those feelings in, they're just going to fester. And what they're going to do is they're going to create distance in the relationship. And so, part of that, to call the family recovery, as you say, has to do with that rigorous honesty and being able to talk about, what you're really feeling, about the guilt that you may feel.
Yeah.
I love that. Absolutely. Dr. Joe, talk to us about your book, Recovery After Rehab, what it's about, and where we can find it.
Well, it'll be published next June by a publisher named Roman and Littlefield. It'll be available through Amazon and everything. And its title is Recovery After Rehab. And the subtitle says it all. It's a guide for the newly sober and their loved ones. And so it takes that position I mentioned before of recovery, of recovery having a point of departure, which has to do with treatment or rehab. But then that's just the beginning of the journey, if you will, across open water. And we know from experience that people who try to cross an ocean by themselves are rarely very successful. It usually is a journey that requires people to be collaborators. And everything we talked about here plays a role in that. The honesty, the willingness of people to look at themselves, the willingness of loved ones to look at how they may need to change their own behavior, how the family might need to begin to restructure itself. And inevitably that leads to a happier lifestyle. It says that, recovery is really a direction, not just a destination. So the book talks about medication-assisted treatment, for example. What role does that play in recovery? It talks about fellowships, different kinds of fellowships like AA or Women for Sobriety, and why they're important. It talks about what I call double trouble in recovery, which is people who have a real diagnosed mental illness and a substance abuse disorder, because a lot of those people get into substance abuse in order to self-medicate their anxiety or their depression or their mood swings. And so they get themselves into trouble because they try to self-medicate. Now sometimes alcoholism causes depression, so it's a thorny issue sometimes. But if you look at family history, like we talked about before, you might be able to get some insights. And they have to then deal with dual stigma, the stigma of being an addict and the stigma of having a mental illness, which is a real challenge. But we know from research now that those two often reoccur. And if you don't tackle them both at the same time, you're not going to likely be successful at either one. So it talks about that. It talks about this issue of healing. Relationships. Examples of kids whose parent, one woman has been a long time alcoholic, and raised 3 kids and did a pretty good job. But the thing that they resented, that they never talked about, was how her alcoholism took her away from them. How they didn't have much of a relationship with her for years. And in her recovery, it became really critical for them to be able to talk about that, to heal that. They loved her. They wanted to support her recovery, but they also really needed to be honest and talk about how it hurt for her not to be very involved with them. And once they were able to cross that bridge and get to the other side, they all felt better. So it talked about all of those issues. And the theme, again, of course, is that recovery begins with rehab. Don't make the mistake of thinking that it's all over once you walk out the door.
Oh, what a bummer. I mean,
it's only easy. That's what people think, though. I'll go in 30 days. That'll be really quick. A quick wash and rinse, and then spin, and then I'm out, and it's okay. And I think research that we did years and years ago, probably back in the 90s, and it was only a small research. It was like 50 people, and out of the 50 people, let's say that's 100% of the people. I think like 60 something drank on the way home from the rehab. And I know I've done that myself. I paid an extortionate amount of money. Well, I went to this treatment centre once, I shan't mention them, very prestigious in Cheshire, in England. And I paid, I don't know, probably £20,000 them days back in the 80s. Right. And I walked in, they explained what it's all about, and they gave me a big book. And the back of my alcoholic mind said, I've just paid $20,000 for a big book. Because when it comes to the recovery of and the description of the alcoholic and the description of the different drinkers, all the studies I've done, 20 odd years in college universities on studying on the neuroplasticity and neural pathways in the addicted brain, the first 164 of the AA book has got to be up there when it comes to education. It really has. And I just love that fact. Absolutely love it. Okay, guys. Oh, sorry, Jen, I interrupted. Go on.
That's okay. It's similar to what you were saying, but I think the thing that is difficult is when for me, my son was full blown acting out, getting arrested, getting kicked out of several schools. I'm in a panic trying to find a rehab, a treatment for him. I don't know anything about treatment. I don't know what it is. Anybody on the phone, when what they're telling me, I'm going, oh, that sounds great. Can we just get him in? Can we just get him in? And all I want to do is get him in, drop him off, and go fix him, please. And I think that's the whole thing is, and I think that's part of Dr. Rob and I's mission, is to really begin the conversation about recovery, what to look for, what does it look like to be recovered, what does it look like when a person is acting out, and what to look for in a rehab, because we don't know what we don't know.
Oh, I've heard that so many times, Jennifer, and I can understand that perfectly. People are in such anxiety about the substance abusing loved one that they just experience a sense of relief with getting into rehab. And again, I understand that relief, and it's a really important first step, but they have to understand it's only a point of departure. And the other thing that's really critical is that because people feel such relief, they don't bother to find out what's going on inside treatment or rehab. They don't ask, well, what kind of groups are you in? What do they talk about? Yeah. Have they talked to you about medication assisted treatment for a while? A lot of times treatment centers become very opaque. They really just don't want to talk about it. So I think that loved ones have the right, and I encourage them to ask, to find out, well, there are, for example, there are things called evidence-based treatments. And you can look them up. You can Google evidence-based treatments for substance abuse, and there they are. And you can call the rehab and say, by the way, do you use any of these treatments? and if so, how do you use them? By the way, has your staff been trained in any of these evidence-based treatments? Right. It's important to ask those questions as opposed to just the relief, because you see ads for rehabs, and it's very appealing because it appeals to the anxiety that people have. Yes. We'll send our kid here. I once consulted to an adolescent treatment facility, a residential one, that was located in a hospital, and later learned that the teens were getting high in the stairwell between the treatment center and the street. So talk about drinking out the door. So there was obviously a lot that needed to be done there. And again, they just were. The teens tend to respond mostly to their craving plus peer pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of it. It's like when you hang around with friends, they're doing it. Why shouldn't you do it? We talked about EMDR before, and somatic experience and NLP and all these great stuff we've got against. And the treatment centers that we looked at, they did none of that. They're teaching out in 1940s and 50s teaching methods, and times have changed. 10 years ago, we found out about neuroplasticity. It's like, oh my God, what an amazing concept that we can change the way we think. I almost wanted to send them the AA book and go, well, it talks about a psychic change and psychic of the mind change, in 1939. So I think it's awesome. Guys, running out of time as usual, and we hate to run out of time. I think this session was better than the last one, Dr. Joe. I really did. It was more informational. I just enjoyed everything.
That's a great compliment.
Yeah, absolutely. So, guys, don't forget. Listen, I put the website across there, josephnowinski.com. Everything's on there. The books you can find. Dr. Joe's book in July is going to come out as well. I think that's going to be great. I'm going to pre-order that myself. So I'll say thank you so much, Dr. Joe Nowinski for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure, full of information, and I just want to recognize you today as being one of the leaders in the fight against recovery, one of the leaders of the information and knowledge that you have, especially endorsing Alcoholics Anonymous, which I do so much myself. So thank you so much, Dr. Joe, for what you do and who you are.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure meeting both of you.
Yes, it has been a pleasure meeting you, and thank you, and just thanks for being on here, especially as we go into more of the pandemic, more people are losing their lives. Go out there, buy Dr. Joe Nowinski's book, and really read about what it is to be recovered and how to recover. So thanks again for all of your support, and it was so lovely meeting you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, guys. We'll be back right after this. Hey guys, welcome back to the back end of the show. This is Recover Channel podcast. I'm Dr. Rob Kelly, the addiction doctor, along with Jennifer Lovely. We just had Dr. Joe Nowinski on the show. Such a great guy, informational, and just one of these. He's got one of them faces that you can just trust. Yeah. He's got one of them ex-military faces that says, "I know shit and you don't, so listen to me." I love that.
I know he does, and a very calm demeanor that is good for anybody that has high anxiety.
Complete opposite to me. So much comes from anxiety. Holy shit, Dr. Rob, will you stop doing that? I'm worse now than when I came in.
Yes.
It takes all sorts.
Yes, it does. Yeah, that was fun. It was a good conversation. I love anything that has to do with healing, not only the addict and the alcoholic, but healing the whole, as the whole. I mean, and that really is what it's about. I love that so much. I think that's, if I could get that across to everyone, I don't know, I just would be a happy girl.
I know. RecoverMeCoaching.com is where you need to visit, guys. RecoveryCoaching.com. We've got some great offers, myself and Jennifer. We've got the normal coaching that you'll see everywhere, apart from we've got a twist on it. But we've also got something coming up that I think you'd be really interested in. So we got together, me and Jen, and we're really passionate about this stuff. So we wanted to get, first of all, the prices are stupid. I mean, they're just so low. But we wanted to get a program in a group setting where people can afford. So if you can't afford $80 a month to improve your life no end, I don't think we can do any better. It comes down to about, I don't know, $3 an hour or something for us. But at the end of the day, we want to help people. We want you to get on board. And this is not about stopping drinking and using. I mean, there's that in there, but it's a bunch of other stuff that Jen takes you through. Jen will base this, and I will come on every week or so just to say hi. But she's the girl with the information. And I got to tell you this story, guys. And I'm not, me and Jen have obviously been doing this for a bit. We met each other a couple of weeks ago. She was over here. But it's funny. I got to tell you a story. She contacted me a year ago or something like that. And, many people, I get contact 3 or 4 times a week off people. And I'm just not interested. But something caught my eye about Jen. But listen, when I first heard her, and we're talking about 29, 30 years of in the industry. I've heard everybody. But I watched and I listened to a recording that she did with a patient. And that's what blew me away. So I know for a fact that Recover Me coaching is going to be amazing. The group sessions are going to be amazing, guys. You really don't want to miss out on this. It's a chance of a lifetime. You've got to go to recovermecoaching.com.
It really is. It is. And thank you for that compliment, Dr. Rob. It is a chance of a lifetime. And here's the deal, is that both Dr. Rob and I have turned our lives around. We've been in the shitter, so to speak, and we've literally turned our lives around. And so you want to be with people that have done the work, have felt the pain, and are doing their work and continue to do their work. So come see us. We also have a free workshop that I'm putting on. It's a writing workshop, and just come see what you think. And that our program starts January 6th, and our writing workshop is January the 3rd. So I will be putting that out there as well. Looking forward to having you guys sign up, looking forward to seeing you, and looking forward to supporting you in healing and moving forward. That's what we're all about, healing and moving forward.
That's it, guys. That's it. recovermecoaching.com is where you need to be. Pop in for a bit, see what it's all about. I'm sure you'll like it.
For sure.
Awesome. What are you up to today, Jen? Oh, you've got a client in like 4 minutes.
I have a client in 4 minutes. So I've got all is good. Good luck today. Hoping everything goes well. Sending you prayers and love.
Excellent. I will text you when they come out.
Okay.
You're my go-to girl.
Yes.
Now, thank you so much for watching, and thank you for listening if you're listening on podcast platforms. This has been the Recovery Channel podcast. We're back on Friday with a special guest, so check us out. I'll do some posting on Facebook. Watch out for the posting about recovermecoaching.com. If you want free books, don't forget, you got Daddy, Please Stop Drinking and The Addiction Diaries by Jen. If you want a free book, contact me, USA only, please. We'll send you a free book. Guys, we'll see you next week.
Bye.